Hello everyone, we are today joined by Dr. Georg Löfflmann. Hello. And today we talk about the German Zeitenwende, which was basically initiated once Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, and basically it was said, there will be 1 billion for the German Bundeswehr as a special fund and something else, and that Germany will take on more or less a leadership role. Now, it's now about 8.5 months later, and one could say, well, not very much happened. Was it an accident of birth? Was it a stillbirth? Or are we missing the bigger changes? We don't see them, because if you look at how Germany often was portrayed, especially I think in the summer, it was like portrayed like it was doing nothing, but actually it was sending quite a lot of material and money to Ukraine, although not as much as some others. And so it's a bit hard to determine, is there something going on, or what is your opinion on this?
I think we need to differentiate a little bit from the rhetoric and what has happened in sort of a practical material sense. I mean, obviously 20 years of structural underfunding and underinvestment in, the Bundeswehr and the German armed forces don't disappear overnight, or this backlog also cannot be resolved in a couple of months. But maybe we can, circle back to the speech that Scholz gave, I think 2 days after the invasion. I believe it was February 27th or 24th. Can't quite remember the exact date. But Scholz said that Germany will now year for year invest more than 2% of its GDP into its armed forces. It said that the Heron TP drones would be armed. He said that Germany would purchase F-35 stealth fighters for the nuclear sharing role to replace the aging Tornado fighter bombers. But that was quite remarkable, because Germany had an absolute torturous debate over these issues. I lost count how many rounds of debate, for example, were held in Germany about this issue of drones alone, and can we arm drones, and how ethical is the drone as a weapon. And the SPD in particular still was essentially reluctant to greenlight the armament of these drones, which were predominantly there to, for example, protect German convoys and missions like in Mali, because for them it was bad politics, because obviously their core electorate were quite hostile to this idea of drones. The same with nuclear weapons and this whole nuclear sharing wall of Germany. So with this speech, Scholz essentially finally declared these debates over, and all of a sudden this was possible. So there was already a little bit a hint of, we are now in a new sort of like societal context or political context in discussing Germany, a bit less idealistic, hand-wringing, and a bit more sort of like realpolitik, like, of course we should like arm our drones when we buy drones. Why, if not, then why don't we buy the damn things in the first place? And the same with the Tornado, who is essentially kept together with 3D printed spare parts, because the original spare parts you can't get anymore. And again, a very pragmatic decision, because most European countries are buying the F-35. And so, like logical or like sensible decision making. However, at the same time, we also need to acknowledge that Scholz gave the Zeitenwende speech facing mounting domestic and international pressure to do more for Ukraine, and also about the state of readiness of the German armed forces. But at the same time, he finds himself in a coalition with the FDP and the Greens, and the FDP in particular is very reluctant to engage in deficit spending. Right? We have the debt brake, which has constitutional status in Germany, so we have this weird mismatch between the 100 billion Special Investment Fund or Sondervermögen that was initiated by Scholz's speech to essentially, resolve this modernization backlog of the German armed forces. And then we have the regular defense budget, which from 2022 to 2023 will not increase, but will actually slightly decrease. So for 2023, we have a defense budget of 50.1 I think 3 billion euros plus 8.5 billion euros from the Special Investment Fund. So together we have a defense budget of about 58, 59 billion. But in order to fulfill 2%, the NATO target of 2% of GDP for defense expenditures that was set in Wales, and which all NATO members should essentially reach by 2024, that would be 70 billion. So we're actually falling short by about 12 billion euros. So Scholz is already essentially negating or negging on one of his core promises in his speech from February. So there is a fundamental problem here, and there's also an unresolved problem: is what is actually happening when the Special Investment Fund, when the Sondervermögen runs out after 4 years, right? Because if Germany really will fulfill this pledge, it will need a regular defense budget of at least 70 billion euros. And when we are discussing that essentially this goal was set in 2014 after the annexation of Crimea, not the full-on Russian invasion that we see now, the debate might actually go maybe more toward 3% or something like that. But the money is the one thing, and the other is the mindset and the very bureaucratic structures that Germany has. So for years, German weapons programs, so-called gold-plated weapons programs like the A400M, like the NH-90 helicopters, the F-125 stabilization frigate, these weapon programs were known for being delivered years too late, with massive cost overruns and frequently absolutely underperforming. And they actually had to be very costly retrofit in order to be combat ready. The Puma infantry fighting vehicle would be another example of that. And these partially dysfunctional procurement strategies and the BAENBW, this Moloch of an procurement agency in Koblenz, those structures have not been reformed at all by the Zeitenwende. And I think there is a bit of a mindset issue here, or lack of urgency. So we're seeing, some encouraging signs. We are seeing Germany ordering the F-35. We are seeing Germany finally deciding on a new heavy lift helicopter. So it opted for 60 Chinook models from the United States of America. And essentially, it opted for foreign military sales from the United States, so directly ordering from the U.S. government, essentially off-the-shelf solutions without costly German special modifications, and also at the moment without sort of involving really German industry to a large extent. But of course, now we also have the problem because of inflation and because of the dollar-euro exchange course. Germany is already getting less bang for its buck than when the Sondervermögen was sort of announced in February and then sort of like formulated in March. So this is a problem. And when we look to the development of the defense budget and the DGAP in Germany, the think tank, and Christian Welling has done a study here, when we look to the development of running costs for, spare parts, ammunition, maintenance, personnel, then essentially, by the end of this decade, the entire German defense budget is going to be taken up by running costs. There's nothing left for investment. So Germany will at some point structurally raise the sheer level of its investment. And the 100 billion, while getting a lot of PR, is for me just essentially to put some gauze on that wound and stop the bleeding for now. But when we really look into the Special Investment Fund, then most of these investments were actually already on the books before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, right? Things like the F-126 frigate, for example, or the U-boat program with Norway, where Germany will acquire two common design submarines, and Norway will receive 4. So a lot of these programs were essentially already, politically negotiated, but essentially they lacked the funds for political reasons. So these were finally now underwritten with financial resources. But when we look to the lessons of Ukraine, then actually we would need to talk about more artillery for the German army, for example. We would need to talk about what about the 20 billion euros that Germany would need to replenish its ammunition stocks, everything from artillery shells to, air-to-ground missiles to Germany's essentially non-existent SHORAD capabilities after it phased out the Roland and in 2005 and the Gepard anti-aircraft tank, which is currently very successful in Ukraine in 2010. And there, I don't really see much of a Zeitenwende at the moment. So essentially, with the 100 billion special investment fund, Germany is finally sort of financially underwriting the type of armed forces that it envisioned in 2014 it would need in 2030, but it hasn't done any investments yet on the type of armed forces that it needs when it looks to, for example, the Russo-Ukrainian war. So again, Alfons Meyer, the chief of the army, for example, said that Germany now plans to double the size of its artillery battalions. But so far, there is neither a decision exactly what new systems those will receive, tracked or wheeled artillery. Probably it's going more into like a wheeled artillery, so like a Panzerhaubitze, turret on the chassis of a Boxer APC, but no systems have been ordered, and we haven't even ordered or orders on the books for those Panzerhaubitze 2000 systems, those Mars multiple rocket launchers that the Bundeswehr, from an already quite low stock of like about 140 respectively, that it has given to Ukraine. So there, I think we can see a bit the sort of like in-between state of the Zeitenwende. Yes, things have happened, and yes, we had some announcements, but then when we look to what actually has happened materially, then at best I would say we see some encouraging signs, but we did not see yet a structural modernization. And when we talk about the fighting prowess or the combat readiness of the Bundeswehr, then I don't think the Bundeswehr is more combat ready now than it was before the Russian invasion or before the Zeitenwende speech in February. If anything, by actually supplying weapons to Ukraine and supplying very scarce artillery systems, combat readiness is probably a bit decreased now for practical reasons.
What I find particularly interesting, so on the whole ammunition side, because when the war broke out, it was I made very early on a video is Russia running out of ammunition and basically stating, okay, ammunition crisis is like that happens nearly in every war anyway, and what I find interesting, I think that Germany doesn't have enough ammunition is not something particularly new for this year. It happened before. I think I read it in one of your articles, and the thing here is now, at least for Ukraine war, we had at least two ammunitions debates. The first was for the Leopard 1, because some people then argued, I think there was a statement, there's no ammo for the Leopard 1, this is why it's not being sent. And then some people brought up, no, there's enough ammo, and then said, no, it would come from Israel or something, and they don't deliver or something else, and it was quite complicated. And for the Gepard, it was again the problem, because I think Switzerland would have provided the ammo. So, was there any announcement, or do we know anything that something about the ammunition changed? I mean, the topic came up now 2 times with supplying it, but the German army doesn't have enough ammunition for more than 2 or 3 days, and then it came up now several times in the, you could say, public debate, as far as I know, at least once, because something also happens only on Mill Twitter, which the public probably mostly ignores. So is there something going on there?
I mean, I think there is a larger story here, and that is that, the West has engaged in 2 decades now of predominantly counterinsurgency warfare. Right? That was, operations against Al-Qaeda and the Taliban in Afghanistan. There was, drone strikes in places like Yemen and Somalia. The very limited intervention in Libya in 2011, Syria against Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. These were missions where we had essentially, special forces on the ground. We had some airstrikes, drone strikes, but it was nowhere near the type of, industrial peer-to-peer conflict that we are seeing playing out in Ukraine. And the sheer, wear and tear on the systems in use, the consumption of artillery shells just far exceeds anything that we have seen over the last 20 years and that Western militaries were really used to anymore. I mean, there was a Panzerhaubitze 2000 in Afghanistan that would fire off a couple of rounds, essentially when the German camp in Mazar-i-Sharif was shelled, except kind of like some big warning shots, and that was it. There wasn't really a conflict scenario anymore, also in the mindset of most planners, where, these kind of systems would fire hundreds and thousands of shells. And of course, all the armies, all the Western militaries, not just the Bundeswehr, but the Bundeswehr maybe more drastically, have, kind of reduced their stocks. I mean, even the United States, which maintains a far bigger arsenal, now had to place an order for 155 millimeter shells for Ukraine. And it's with South Korea. The Russians, for God's sake, had to go to North Korea because they're running out of ammunition. So this is really a story, I think, where we just see that we no longer have, the kind of arsenals and depots and ammunition stocks that you might have seen, in World War II or in the Korean War. So that's the one story. And then the second story is that, so far, I think military planners, to a certain degree, are still kind of reluctant to completely change gear now, right? I mean, what we're seeing, for example, with the special investment fund, with the Bundeswehr, is that predominantly what we're seeing is naval systems and systems for the Air Force that are being on order, but the army, the Heer, which kind of bears the brunt of the fight in a conflict scenario like in Ukraine, so far has received relatively the smallest portion, if you will, of the special investment fund. So we have a couple of new Pumas, but what about the schwere Waffenträger, the new sort of like the wheeled infantry formations that are getting rid of their Wiesel tank cats, and they're switching to a version of the Boxer with a machine cannon, no artillery systems. Obviously, we see the digitization is a massive issue. So 3.3 command control communications, where the Bundeswehr still has radios from the 80s and the 90s, where we actually can't communicate with our NATO allies anymore because those aren't secure lines of communication. And in Lithuania on training exercises, they literally have shout man to man. So this is obviously a big issue, and this alone, I think, is something that will be consuming around 20 billion. But yeah, I think the thing with the ammunition that we are not seeing yet these massive orders. I think it is this sort of structural imagination that we were sort of completely get an expeditionary warfare in these small type counterinsurgency scenarios, and now a massive bureaucratic machine like the Bundeswehr needs, I think, another time to change gear. But as I said, the ammunition crisis, if you will, it's also something experienced by others, because the Ukraine just dwarfs everything that we've seen in the last 20 years.
Then thank you very much. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. Bye.